It was one of those mornings where the light seemed to spill into every corner, chasing away the shadows with a quiet certainty. The air carried that crisp, clean scent that comes only after a long night of stillness, as though the world had been polished and set out fresh for the day ahead. I could hear the distant hum of life beginning to stir, the faint rattle of a shop shutter being rolled up, the clink of porcelain cups in a cafe, the gentle murmur of footsteps on the pavement. Each sound felt like part of a gentle symphony, setting the tempo for a day that promised more than the ordinary. There was something in the way the streets stretched out before me that morning, lined with their familiar shapes yet somehow appearing new. It was as though the world itself was inviting me to step forward, to take part in whatever lay ahead, as if the very air carried the whisper of possibilities. I walked slowly at first, letting the rhythm of my stride find its place, letting my thoughts align with the steady beat of my feet on the ground. There was no rush, just a growing awareness that this was not a day to simply get through, but a day to live into fully. The sun hung low enough to cast long, golden beams through the trees, brushing their leaves with a glow that seemed almost unreal. It made the buildings gleam in soft warmth, turning plain brick and stone into something almost elegant. I noticed details I had overlooked countless times before: a crooked sign above a bakery door, the delicate lace of ironwork on an old balcony, the way a small bird tilted its head as if listening to my footsteps. It struck me how often beauty goes unnoticed in the haste of daily life, and how today, for some reason, nothing escaped my eye. I passed a small group of people chatting by a corner shop, their laughter carrying just far enough to make me smile. A bus rumbled past, its windows catching the sunlight in brief, dazzling flashes. Even the ordinary, the uneven cracks in the pavement, the faint smell of roasted coffee drifting from somewhere near by seemed touched by a quiet significance. It was as though the morning was quietly reminding me that the start of something important rarely announces itself with grand fanfare. More often, it begins like this, soft, steady, and full of unspoken promise. As I walked on, I became aware of how naturally my thoughts shaped themselves into words. I found myself quietly speaking them under my breath, as if narrating the moment to myself, noticing the cadence, the rise and fall, the way certain sounds seemed to fit together so effortlessly. It was a private practice, a gentle rehearsal for conversations yet to come, and with every phrase I felt more in tune with the rhythm of the language, more aware of its music. It was a small thing, but it made me feel grounded, as though the day and I were learning to move in step with each other. By the time I reached the end of the street, the sunlight had risen higher, the colors growing sharper, the air a little warmer. There was a pull in my chest, not of anxiety but of anticipation, the sense that whatever I was walking toward mattered, even if I didn't yet know exactly how. It wasn't just another morning, it was the opening line of a chapter not yet written, the first note of a melody still unfolding. And so I kept walking, knowing that the first step had already set everything in motion. There's a certain music to language when it begins to flow without effort, when each word follows the next as naturally as footsteps on a well-worn path. I could feel it from the moment I spoke my first sentence that morning. The words weren't forced or carefully pieced together. They simply arrived, ready to be spoken, carrying with them a sense of ease that was almost physical. It was as though the tongue, the lips, and the breath were all working in quiet harmony, shaping sounds into meaning without a second thought. As I walked, the rhythm of my speech seemed to sync with the rhythm of the day itself. The steady beat of my shoes on the pavement matched the gentle rise and fall of my sentences, and the pauses between thoughts felt like natural spaces for the world to breathe alongside me. I spoke softly, sometimes aloud, sometimes only in my mind, testing phrases, turning them over, enjoying the feel of each one before letting it go. There was no rush to get anywhere with them, no urgency, just the pleasure of the sound, the way certain combinations seemed to hum like a well-tuned chord. Even the simplest words carried weight when they were given space to exist. I noticed how the shape of a vowel could stretch like warm sunlight, how a consonant could snap like the crisp edge of autumn air. The awareness of these tiny details made speaking feel less like a task and more like an art. And with every sentence, I felt my confidence deepen, not because I was speaking perfectly, but because I was speaking naturally. The conversations I passed on the street became part of this quiet practice. Snippets of phrases reached me from doorways, bus stops, and cafe tables, each one a little offering of rhythm and tone. I'd catch the lilt of a greeting, the easy laughter between friends, the careful emphasis in a shopkeeper's question. These were not just words, they were the heartbeat of everyday life, and in hearing them, I felt my own language pulse in time with it. There were moments when I would repeat something I'd overheard, just to feel how it sat in my own mouth. A quick morning in the same cheerful tone as the passer-by or the drawn out absolutely from a conversation behind me. I wasn't imitating so much as absorbing, letting the sounds blend into my own speech until they felt like they belonged there. And with each small addition, the language became more alive, more a part of me. The world seemed to respond in kind. People leaned in slightly when I spoke, as though the clarity and ease in my voice invited them closer. Shopkeepers met my eye when I greeted them, and strangers answered my small remarks with a warmth that told me the words had landed well. It wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about connection, about letting language bridge the space between us with no hesitation, no stumbling. By midday, speaking felt as natural as breathing. I no longer thought about finding the right words. They came to me as I needed them, fitting neatly into the rhythm of my steps, my thoughts, my day. And in that effortless flow, I realized that language is not just something you use, it's something you live, and so I let it carry me forward, one smooth sentence at a time. There's a certain kind of magic in walking through a place you've never seen before, when everything feels both unfamiliar and inviting at the same time. At first, it's just a collection of buildings, streets, and signs, but as you move through it, details start to emerge, little clues that tell you this place has its own life, its own rhythm, its own way of breathing. The first corner I turned revealed a narrow street lined with shops, whose windows were filled with colors and textures I couldn't quite take in all at once. A bakery displayed loaves with golden crusts that caught the light like they were part of the morning itself, and next to it a small bookstore leaned slightly forward as if it were curious about who might step inside. Each step brought a new frame of the picture, and I found myself slowing down just to let my eyes take it all in. There was a quiet pleasure in noticing the way the street curved gently ahead, revealing just enough to make me want to keep going. A cyclist passed by with a scarf trailing behind, the wheels humming over the cobblestones. A shop door swung open and let out the warm scent of spices that lingered in the air long after the door had closed. These were the moments that stitched the place together in my mind, small, fleeting, yet somehow unforgettable. The people were just as much a part of the story as the streets themselves. A man outside a flower stall arranged bunches of tulips and roses with the precision of someone who loved their work. Two women stood by the curb sharing a conversation, their faces animated, their laughter spilling into the space between them and reaching me like an uninvited but welcome melody. Even the briefest glances from passers-by told me something, the way they carried themselves, the expressions they wore, the pace of their steps. It was as though the city introduced itself not all at once, but piece by piece, through the quiet generosity of strangers. The further I walked, the more I began to recognize patterns. The way certain shopkeepers leaned in the doorway at the same time each morning, the slow build of activity in the market square, the shifting light that painted the buildings in shades of gold, then gray, then gold again. It was a reminder that a place isn't just about where you are. It's about what you allow yourself to notice. The more attention you give it, the more it seems to open up to you. And then there were the surprises. A side street I almost passed without a glance revealed a hidden courtyard filled with potted plants, a stone bench, and a fountain whose trickling water softened the air. A small gallery with no sign displayed paintings in the window that looked as though they'd been pulled from someone's dream. Every time I thought I understood the place, it offered me something unexpected, as if to say, "There's more to me than you think." By the time the sun began to lower, I realized that I'd spent the entire day letting the streets lead me where they wanted. I had no map, no plan, only the willingness to follow my curiosity. And with each new corner turned, each shopfront admired, each brief exchange with a stranger, the place had become less foreign and more a part of my own story. And I knew that tomorrow it would have more to show me still. There's a certain shift that happens when listening becomes more than just hearing words. It's as if the air itself becomes sharper, carrying not only the sounds but the layers beneath them. That morning every voice seemed clearer, every syllable landing exactly where it was meant to. I could hear the rise and fall in a greeting, the slight hesitation before a question, the warmth tucked into the edges of a thank you. It wasn't just about understanding the words. It was about feeling the intention woven into them. When someone spoke to me, I found myself catching those subtle notes I might have missed before. The way the tone softened when they spoke of something personal, or how it quickened with excitement when the subject changed to something they loved. Even the pauses seemed to carry meaning, like tiny spaces where truth settled before the next thought was born. And the more I noticed these things, the easier it became to respond in a way that felt natural, almost effortless. Conversations didn't feel like a game of finding the right words anymore. They became exchanges, flowing back and forth like water. I remember stopping by a small cafe and ordering a drink. The person behind the counter asked, "How's your morning been?" In a tone that wasn't just polite. It carried genuine interest, a slight upward lift at the end that made it an invitation rather than a formality. I caught it instantly and answered not with a simple good, but with something fuller, something that matched the openness in their voice. It turned a passing interaction into a small connection, and as I walked away, I realized how much that mattered. Throughout the day, these moments kept happening. A shopkeeper telling me about a new delivery spoke in a way that hinted at pride, and I mirrored that with my own enthusiasm. A stranger on the street asked for directions, and I noticed the relief in their voice when I answered clearly. It wasn't about perfect vocabulary or flawless grammar. It was about meeting the tone, catching the rhythm, and letting the words fit into it naturally. Even in group conversations, the change was noticeable. I could tell when someone was about to speak by the subtle shift in their breath or the way their gaze sharpened. I could sense when to lean in and when to give space, when to respond with humor, and when to let the silence stretch just enough for their thoughts to settle. Listening this way felt less like a skill and more like an instinct, one that grew stronger with every exchange. And what surprised me most was how this attention to tone and expression made others more at ease. People seemed to relax when they realized they were being truly heard, not just their words, but their meaning, their intent. The conversation didn't just move forward, it deepened. It became a place where both voices could exist fully, without rush or interruption. By the end of the day, I wasn't thinking about listening as an active effort anymore. It had blended seamlessly into the way I spoke, the way I responded, the way I moved through the world. Every subtle tone, every shift in expression, every unspoken layer became part of the language I shared with those around me. And in that shared space, the words finally felt complete. It's funny how the smallest moments can carry the greatest weight. A single word spoken clearly, a phrase understood without hesitation, a question answered without the need to pause and search. It's in these moments that something shifts. They don't make noise, they don't demand attention, but they settle deep inside like tiny anchors, holding you steady in the current of the day. That morning began with one of those moments. I was buying a loaf of bread from a little bakery, and without even thinking, I asked for it in the exact phrasing I'd heard locals use. The words rolled out smoothly, without that slight edge of uncertainty that used to cling to my voice. The shopkeeper didn't slow down or repeat himself when he answered. He just nodded, wrapped the bread, and passed it over with a smile that told me I'd blended right into the rhythm of the exchange. Walking out, I caught myself smiling too, not out of pride exactly, but out of a quiet satisfaction. It felt like slipping into a stream and finding you can keep pace with the current. The rest of the day seemed to carry that same thread, ordering coffee, giving directions to someone who asked, responding to a question in the street, all done without the usual flicker of doubt. It wasn't about perfection, it was about ease. Even when I didn't know the exact word, I found another way to say it, and the person I was speaking to understood straight away. That understanding, that bridge built without hesitation, was its own kind of victory. Each small success seemed to make the next one easier. The mind stopped holding its breath with every interaction. The voice found a steadier tone, the words arrived without being chased. And with each smooth exchange came that same quiet spark inside, the kind that doesn't flare up in grand celebration but burns steadily, feeding confidence in the most natural way. There was a moment in the afternoon that stayed with me. I was sitting outside a cafe when someone nearby began speaking quickly, asking if they could borrow the empty chair at my table. A few months ago, I might have hesitated, replaying the question in my head before answering. But this time, I caught every word the first time. I smiled, gave a simple, fluid reply, and the conversation moved on as if we'd been speaking the same language all our lives. It was such a small thing, but it left a warmth in its wake, the kind that lingered long after. By evening, I realized I'd spent the whole day stringing together these quiet triumphs without even trying. And that was the real shift. When success stopped feeling like a rare event and started feeling like part of the day's natural rhythm. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about knowing deep down that I could meet the world in its own language and be understood. And so I carried that quiet confidence home with me, letting it rest in the smile that stayed long after the day was done. As the day began to wind down, I noticed something I hadn't been paying attention to before. My voice felt different, warmer somehow, steadier, as though it had found its balance in the hours of speaking and listening that had passed. Each conversation, each small exchange, had shaped it little by little until it no longer felt like something I had to control. It carried itself now, moving through the air with a kind of quiet strength I hadn't realized was building. Earlier in the day, my focus had been on finding the right words, making sure they landed where I wanted them to. But now there was no second guessing, no unnecessary pauses. The words seemed to know where they belonged, flowing together with a rhythm that matched my thoughts. It felt less like I was speaking a language and more like the language was speaking with me, as if we had finally learned to trust each other. The evening light softened the edges of the streets, casting a golden haze over shop windows and lamplights. As I walked, I caught my reflection in the glass and saw my lips moving, not hurriedly, not tensely, but in a calm, natural way. I realized I was talking to someone beside me, and I could hear in my own voice a kind of energy that hadn't been there that morning. The words weren't just sounds anymore. They carried color, texture, even warmth. They felt alive, and that aliveness seemed to stretch outward, connecting me to everything around me. The shopkeeper who waved from across the street, the group of friends laughing outside the cafe, the older man feeding birds in the square, all of them felt closer, as though the space between us had thinned somehow. I understood now that language wasn't just about communication. It was about connection, about weaving invisible threads between people until you realized you were all part of the same fabric. I stopped for a moment in the square, listening to the hum of voices drifting through the evening air. Different accents, different rhythms, different cadences, but all of them part of the same living conversation that never really stopped. I added my own voice to it without hesitation, speaking to someone who'd asked for the time. It was such a simple question, but my answer came with an ease and warmth that felt like more than just a response. It felt like an offering. The more I spoke, the more I realized that the day had been quietly training me, building my confidence not in great leaps, but in steady, almost invisible steps. Every word I'd spoken and every tone I'd caught had been a small stone in the path, and now, at the end of the day, I could look back and see just how far I'd walked. There was no need to celebrate it out loud. The proof was in the way my voice carried without strain, in the way my words seemed to belong in the air, and in the way people met my gaze when I spoke, as if they could hear not just the words, but the life in them. And in that moment, with the evening wrapping softly around me, I knew I was part of something larger, and that the connection would only grow stronger from here. And so, as the day draws to a close, I find myself looking back at each moment. Those first steps into the morning, the gentle flow of words finding their place, the slow unfolding of streets and faces, the conversations that danced with tone and meaning, the quiet victories that settled deep inside, and the steady growth that made my voice stronger and my world more connected. It's strange how a single day can hold so much without ever seeming rushed. Every sound, every glance, every shared word built something that wasn't there before. A kind of invisible thread now stretches between myself and this place, and I know that tomorrow it will be stronger still. So I leave tonight with gratitude for the moments that spoke softly but stayed, for the voices that welcomed me in, and for the language that now feels less like a skill to practice and more like a part of who I am. And with that, I say good night, carrying the promise of another day just waiting to be lived.